What we're going to talk about today, Pragmatic Python, welcome to the jungle, title of the meetup. Some feedback I'd gotten from the other meetups I did was that the topics were a little bit not quite what people were wanting. There was a request to sort of try and build Python knowledge from the ground up, and so that's what we're here to do. Welcome to the jungle, just kind of what I came up with for we're going to get started building those skills. Minimize this. Yep, I'm Joe Riddle, Joseph, either one's good. I think the people in Untitled Chapter are actually the only people that know me as Joseph. At this point, everyone else in my life knows me as Joe. I mentioned the previous meetup recordings. We do actually have a website made by myself, SpokanePython.com. We have 2 or 3 recordings from some of the previous meetups if you're wanting to go back and check out some topics. Those are actually on the Intel Tech YouTube, but there's also some blog stuff on the Python website as well. So Pragmatic, the title of the series, and I should backtrack a little. The idea of doing a series of meetups is that we can hopefully build from month to month. We meet at a monthly cadence right now. And so instead of what I've been doing before, where each meetup was kind of just its own thing, its own topic, the goal here is to try and build your skills month to month. And if you come back next time, we're going to build on what you learned here today. Still kind of hammering out what those later meetups will look like, but that's the plan. So Pragmatic, what does that mean? If you're an engineer, you're probably familiar with the book Pragmatic Programmer. I haven't read it, but I know it's popular. These are just some definitions I found that are a little bit unwieldy. Relating to matters of fact or practical affairs often relates to blah, blah, blah. I don't know what that means. A little bit more simpler one from Oxford Languages. Pragmatic means dealing with things sensibly and realistically in a way that is based on practical rather than theoretical considerations. So really what that means is our goal is to teach you practical skills when it comes to Python, how to actually create, manage, host, run your own project. We're not necessarily trying to get too abstract here for this series. The goal is just if you come, you're going to learn some real skills, hopefully by the end of the series. And with some time spent outside of these meetups, you'll feel confident to kind of tackle your own projects. So that's the goal as we get started. I mentioned probably try and do about 5 to 6 of these meetups. We'll see what people's feedback is, and we can always steer those. Nothing's set in stone right now. Just some ideas for later topics would include things like managing your dependencies. That probably wouldn't be its own talk, but maybe bundled together with publishing your own Python package, places and ways to run your Python projects in the production environment. Maybe that's using like Docker, Kubernetes, or Azure, AWS, all sorts of different ways to run project. We might even get into intro to machine learning. I don't really know that much about machine learning myself, and that's actually something that's fun about doing these meetups is every time I do one of these meetups, I try and really learn the material as well as I can so I can hopefully share it. That coupled with, as Mark mentioned, I've been using Python about 1.5 years professionally. And then, as I mentioned to you, and sorry, I forgot your name, it was the first programming language I used like 8 years ago or something, and then really didn't touch it through college, through my first couple of years of working as in the industry. But now I'm kind of back to it, which is kind of fun. So one other thing, which I don't think I have a slide for, is if you guys are wanting to give a talk or at all interested in giving a talk, I would love to have involvement from the community. My goal is not to be up here necessarily talking month after month. I don't think my voice is that interesting and I'll run out of things to say, but I would really like to see, hopefully, especially as we start going in person, if someone has something where they even just want to give a lightning talk, 5 to 10 minutes, it doesn't have to be a big long thing. Reach out, let's get that going. If you're not comfortable doing it by yourself, I'll hop up here with you. And we can make that happen. I badger a lot of people here at work about hosting. So far, no one's bit on joining me. I think the #1 response I get is, well, I don't know anything about Python. And you really, one interesting thing, if someone else doesn't know it and you can share that, then that's gold. That's all you really need. So the barrier to entry is not as low, or is not as high as you might think, in my opinion. So today's format, I see maybe half of you brought a computer, so we might change it up a little bit. But the goal here is I'll talk and try and do some live coding, because just listening to me talk for 60 minutes is not the most interesting thing, and who doesn't want to watch someone mess up live programming, because it's very fun. And then the goal to, again, try and kind of foster working together in a community instead of just me talking at you for a while is try and do a little bit of pair programming for maybe 15 to 20 minutes, and we're going to have kind of a code sample that we'll progress through. And the goal is you guys just, pick maybe the next cool thing that comes to mind to add on to that, hack on it for a little while. And then if you're willing, one or both of you can hop up here and just, present to the group very informally, hey, this is what we did, and just kind of start to foster that community of working together and to, other people talking as well. So that's the goal, or the format. Real quick, before we get into thing, I don't have a slide for this, but I just wanted to know who's new to Python or pretty new. Most. Okay. Who's new to programming in general? Like, okay. Right. Yeah. No. Cool. I just want to get a gauge of, if I wasn't really sure if this was going to be most people's first programming language, or if, hey, maybe I use JavaScript or C# or whatever other language, and you just haven't really used Python. So it seems like most everyone has some programming background, but is maybe newer to Python. So as we kind of move forward, I'll try and steer the content that way to hopefully not kind of go over things you might already know if you've used a different programming language. But today really is about assuming very little to no knowledge. So hopefully by the end of this, you can just go start writing a Python program by yourself. Outline, real quick, I'm going to tell you what I'm going to tell you. Hopefully I'm going to tell you that, and at the end we'll try and recap what I told you. It's kind of the outline I want to follow. What is Python, installing Python, running Python. We'll talk a little bit about modules and packages, a little bit of a difference there, but it's really not super complicated, but we will talk about it. And then just using some of the built-in stuff to the standard library, things like date times and things like just modules that are packaged with Python. And then we'll talk about using some more common packages that you would install from like a package manager or like PyPI. Yeah, let's get into it. I mentioned a live coding example, which I'll kind of try and bounce between slides and coding. I'm just working off the one screen, and it's shared up there. So what's up there is what I'm seeing. So I'll kind of bounce between those two things. But one of my favorite things to do when I'm messing with a new language, for example, a couple years ago, I started playing around with Flutter, which uses the language Dart, is I just made a little like Craigslist scraper app to look at cars, because that's something I waste a lot of time doing, is just looking at used cars for sale, even though I don't need one. Sorry, what?
You have a question in the chat.
All right, let's just bounce over. That's the transcript.
It says that we use repl.it.
Oh, Replit? I have not personally really used Replit. I think that's what people call it, Replit or Repple.it. So I don't know. For today, yes, I think so, from the little I know about it. Potentially in future meetups, we might run into issues as things get a little bit more complicated and we're maybe working with a file system a little bit more. But I think for today, from what I know about it, you'll be good to go. And thank you, Aaron, for telling me there was a question, because I don't see the notifications pop up. So back to the Craigslist. I like to waste a lot of time looking at Craigslist cars for sale, used cars. So that's kind of my goal today, is just we'll build a little mini CLI tool you can run on the command line and search for cars for sale, find lowest price cars, some other stuff. We'll get through as much as we can in about an hour or so. And if I am hitting that hour mark and I'm oblivious to it, stop me and we'll break off into to the pair programming, because I really do want to do that. But yeah, that's the plan for code samples. What is Python? The money question that you came here to maybe find out. And I am, real quick, I'm not using PowerPoint. I'm actually using a markdown slide tool. So I don't have any fancy like transitions or anything. So normally I would maybe like make one show up at a time and go through them, but we're not doing that because my tool doesn't have that. So anyways, what is Python? Does anyone know? No, I'm just kidding. I won't put it.
An obvious word-based programming language with minimum use of symbols.
Yeah, that's a really great. I wasn't going to say that, so I'm glad you did. That is a really great point.
Can you repeat that for the online? They have to hear it.
Oh, yeah, right.
Yeah, so the answer was it is more of like a text or word-based programming tool versus a symbol-based. So I think like an example of that is like writing out the word and or instead of like a symbol, like an ampersand or something. And some other examples. That's a great answer. Anyone else want to take a stab? I mean, there's no right or wrong answer here. Okay, sounds good.
It's a snake.
It is a snake.
That's what I was going to say, Mark.
I like it. It is a snake. Okay, couple things about it. Python is an interpreted language, so basically what that means is you don't have to compile the code before you run it. This is something I've honestly read about several times, and I haven't worked with like the nitty-gritty of like C Python, which I'll explain in a second. And so I do have to really refresh this in my brain every time I want to talk about it. But basically what's going on is when you run the Python, an interpreter, kind of this middle process, you could call it, is interpreting the code and running it directly instead of compiling the code to something that the like your processor can talk to. This isn't a great explanation, and I wasn't really planning on going super deep into it, but it's different from a language like, well, Mark, you can help me on this, C#, which I don't think is compiled. It's not interpreted. I don't know if there's a way to run it interpreted. Yeah. Yeah. That being said, you can compile it, and that's actually like when you do run Python, it's usually compiled at least partially. And what that's compiled by is, or down to is like C Python is basically the C version of Python. Iron Python is like a C# version of it. So it can get like apologies, I wasn't really planning on getting too much into it. So I'll continue on, but basically the Python language is an interface, and then there's a bunch of different ways to implement that interface. And you can do that using like C or C# or even JavaScript. There's a whole bunch of different ways to do it. That's all I'll say there. Dynamic. So I actually did a talk a couple months ago where I talked a little bit more about dynamic and strongly typed features of Python. So what that means in Python, if you create a variable, and I don't actually have a code sample, but I'll show it later here, you can assign it to like a integer, like a number, like I equals 10. And then in the next line, you can assign that to a string, like hello world. And that's totally fine. You can do that in Python. It doesn't care. And that's where that kind of dynamic quality comes in. But what I mean when I write here that it's strongly typed is you can't kind of willy-nilly combine types necessarily. So I think in JavaScript, if you do like the string hello world plus 3, the integer, you'll just get a string back that's like hello world with 3 at the end. I'm seeing nods, so I think I'm pretty sure that's how it works. In Python, you're going to get an error because what you can't do is just, like I said, kind of combine types. Like at a given point in the program, all of your variables are a specific type, but that type can change as the program runs through. So that's kind of the difference between, whereas JavaScript would be an example, I think, more of a weakly typed language where you can like combine strings and integers, and that's actually where you might get a lot of funky bugs that you're not expecting. Python is indented. If you've looked at Python code, you'll notice there's a lack of braces. Everything is indented, which some people like, some people don't like, but that's the way it works. It is touted often as kind of being a beginner-friendly language. As my friend here mentioned, it's kind of easy to read, uses kind of English language a lot versus other symbols, or something like, I don't know, closure, which I haven't even used, but or Objective-C, where you look at it and you're like, I have no idea what's going on. Python is usually pretty easy to read. And the final thing, it's object-oriented, which is basically just you treat things as objects. You model them as objects. So like if I'm working with a Craigslist post, which we will in a little bit, I'll create a class that's going to kind of encapsulate that logic. You can program in a like functional style, but it is geared towards being object-oriented. A lot of these things are a little bit less of like yes or no one way or the other, and it's kind of a spectrum. For example, like the strongly typed, you can have some strongly typed things and some weakly typed things, and comparing them is not as easy as you might think. The recording for that talk is actually online, I think, if you do want to go and watch it. I got more content to cover. What time are we at? 6:25. I'm gonna try and pick it up a little bit, and I will sit down. No, I'll stay up. One question you might have, and this was probably a more common question a couple years back, was should I use Python 2 or Python 3? Long story short, use Python 3. Python 2 has been deprecated and sunset, and this link goes to the official Python documentation that talks about it. If someone wants you to use Python 2, kind of shake them and say why, and if they really want you to, then I don't. Yeah, that's a different conversation. Since like I said, I've only been using it professionally for about 1.5 years, which isn't that long, but it has not been an issue for me. Even really popular packages like NumPy, sklearn, things that kind of get really into the nitty-gritty of the deep internals of Python, which I think for a long time did have kind of some issues with going from 2 to 3. Everything that I've worked with personally has worked just fine with Python 3. So that's all I'll say there. Like I said, we're going from the ground up, so I do want to just touch on installing Python. This is a Windows box, which I have on my computer. The computer I'm using is Windows box. The easiest way and the way I install Python is I literally just go and install it like an exe, like any other program you install. If you use Chocolatey, which I think Mark uses, probably maybe a couple other people, it's like, it works, yeah. Windows package manager, that works fine. Linux, I'm 99% sure just the sudo apt-get install Python will install the latest supported version of Python 3, with the small caveat being the similar issue on if you use a Mac, which I see at least two Macs, and I have a Mac in my backpack, which I just got maybe like 6 months ago. So I kind of went through, okay, how do I set up Python on this thing the right way? And long story short, this article does a really great job explaining it, and it's not the purpose of this talk, but don't use the built-in Python. It's probably 9 times out of 10 going to be Python 2, or it's going to be used for some like system internals. You really don't want to mess with it. You definitely don't really want to use it. And if you do mess with it, you can really break things on your operating system. I've read stories of people like tried to alias the Python 2 to Python 3 that then the internal system was using, and then they couldn't even open like a terminal or do very basic things. I think that I used Homebrew. I hadn't used it before. Seems to be Homebrew is less in vogue these days. I don't super keep up with like the Mac community, but there's another cool tool called PyEnv, which will manage different Python versions on one machine for you. And that's actually a tool you can use across Windows, Linux, Mac, all of it. So running Python, and this is where I will actually start to hop off the slides and show you guys some stuff. The Repple, R-E-P-L, I read a lot of these things online, but I never talk to anyone about it because I'm like one of 2 people here who uses Python. So sometimes I say things and then I hear someone say it and I'm like, oh, I'm saying it wrong. But I think it's pronounced Repple. Stands for read, eval, or evaluate, print, loop. And basically all that really means is if I open up, and I will sit down here, a terminal, and I enter in Python, which I have installed on my machine, we are now in our REPL. And we're reading from the command line. I will say message equals hello world. I know, very riveting. I will print message, and its output. This is probably the most basic form of like developing Python. When I close this terminal, everything I wrote is going to be gone. When I reopen it, it's not going to be there. If you have your terminal history, you could go back and see what you ran. But when I close this or I open another terminal instance, it's totally separate. I'd say this is useful for like quick looking at maybe a new package or doing a help message. I don't honestly really use that much. You can type in help and pass in an object and you'll get some help message. I don't think that you can do like the typical -- help from inside the REPL. You want to use the help function. That's about all I have to say about that. It's pretty simple. The way you run most things from the command line. The next slightly more advanced thing is the IDLE, which stands for Integrated Development and Learning Environment. This is actually a relatively full-fledged IDE, or Integrated Development Environment, as I have here. It's not going to do a lot of the fancy things that you'd expect from if you're coming from, say, JavaScript and you're using VS Code or whatever JetBrains. I don't know what the name of the JetBrains tool for VS Code is. Pycharm. Yeah. It's not going to have all the tools of Pycharm. That being said, you can do what we did before. You can print hello world. You'll actually start getting some like syntax suggestions and even syntax highlighting. And if you open up, you can actually like create a file. And here you can start persisting the code you're actually writing in a file. I can save this as something.python and run it. I don't really use this. I think I used it when I was first learning Python. If you are really getting serious about Python development, I would highly suggest going and getting a more full-fledged IDE, unless you just don't want to for some reason. I'm sure there's some great reasons, but I would suggest that you investigate a better IDE. And that brings us to VS Code, Pycharm, as you mentioned. There's definitely a bunch of other ones. I personally use VS Code or Visual Studio Code. It's free, at least partially open source, I think. I don't actually know if it's open. Yeah, it is. Okay. Pycharm is, I don't think, open source. You can get it for free, with a caveat being there's a paid version. And I think depending on the type of work you're doing, if it's for like an enterprise company, you are supposedly supposed to pay for the paid version, like a license, sort of similar to Visual Studio, I think. I use VS Code for all my development, which we'll show in a minute. And actually, I'll pop that open really quick. And so if you haven't used VS Code, it's going to look very similar to most of your other, and actually I'll create a whole new window because this is the sort of the finished version of our code. We'll select the version, Python. We'll go ahead and print hello world. Okay, so if you do Control tilde, pop open a terminal. Oh, what do we got?
Now you're sitting.
Oh, are they staring at the top of my head? Perfect. We'll save this to my desktop because what better place to save stuff? And then, oh, got a whole bunch of stuff. And the hello world. Sweet. Over to here. So that's how you run Python. Yeah, long story short, I'd use an IDE unless you're doing really basic debugging or something and you want to use like the terminal or the REPL. How are we doing on time? 33, cruising. So I mentioned I talked about a module. If you start getting into Python, you're going to hear the term module used a lot. It's kind of what's the expression, like a $2 word for a 10-cent term, something like that, where it's basically a module is just a Python script. It's just a single file that defines a bunch of functions. That's really all there is to it. This is taken straight. Go ahead. Yeah, feel free to interrupt too.
Typically, do you only have one class in one file, or can you define multiple classes in a module?
That's a great question. So 2 parts to your question. Typically, best practice, I think you're just going to want to have one class per module. Caveat being that you can have as many classes as you want in a Python module, and depending on the functionality and what you're doing, you might want to have multiple classes. You might, in fact, not even want to have any classes, and you just might want to have a bunch of top-level functions not encapsulated in a class at all. So that is something that's kind of different from, I think, C#, though it might be different in some of the newest versions. I guess check out Mark's talk and he'll let you know in a couple of weeks. But if you like want to create like your standard C# main, as of I think like C#8, you had to put it inside of a class and have like your static main. But in Python, you don't need to do that. Though I think in the latest version of C#, you don't actually need that. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I don't work in C# anymore. I don't. I just live in Python. Yeah. That's a great question. Thank you. And yeah, people online, I think my volume's up. So if you are willing, feel free to unmute and interrupt with questions. I am not seeing any messages popping up. Cool. So the anatomy of a module, or what does a module look like? At the top, we're going to have our imports. This is very similar to other programming languages where you have like your using statement, or yeah, I think in JavaScript, it's still going to be an import. Here we have a function, def main, that's going to be our function declaration. This function takes in no parameters. If it did, they would be between the parentheses, but we'll get into that. In this case, we're using a built-in module called sys, and sys has argv, which is basically just your command line arguments. And what we're doing here is just down below, we're running our Python script, passing in my personal favorite vehicle, which is a Mitsubishi Montero Sport, and then we're printing it out to the command line, or to the terminal. One question you might have is, what does this if _ name _ mean? And 2 things. One, the double underscores are in Python commonly referred to as dunder. So if you see that or read that online, you see like, hey, like, what's your dunder name doing? That's going to be what they're talking about, is like the double underscores. And in this case, the dunder name is basically checking to see, hey, was this script run as your entry point? So you see I'm importing sys at the top of this module. Sys probably has a whole bunch of stuff declared in it that I might not want to run when I import it. And the way to kind of check to see, like, am I running this script as this is actually like what I want to run from the command line, or am I just importing it, is you can check the dunder name equals, and then it's just main. It's always main. And then we're just calling the function. So the kind of next step beyond a module is a package. Packages are a way of structuring Python's module namespace by using dotted module names. So when we import Python packages, we're going to import using like from numpy dot whatever, and that's kind of the way the structure works. I think I have an example here. So in this case, on the top, we're going to see basically a file structure where we have a folder called app on the top, and then inside we'll have a dunder init, dunder main, and then app.py, or all of them are .py. And so what the init does is basically marks this directory as a Python package. So if I have another package, either a sub package or something, some code like near this code, and I want to import it, then I have to add this dunder init file. And basically that just tells Python, hey, I'm creating a local Python package that I want to be able to use in other parts of my code. And you just create this file, and it can be empty. Oftentimes it is. You can also import some other stuff into it. I won't get into details, but Oftentimes it's just an empty file that just sits there to tell Python that this is a module, or excuse me, a package. And then similar to the 2 slides ago where we talked about dunder name, and then we're checking to see if it equals main. If we want to run a Python package from the command line, then we need to have this dunder main.py file sitting in our folder. And basically what this does is tells Python, hey, when I run this module, like so python-m app, m for like the module package, then run the code that's in this file. And again, we can use the dunder name to check and see if we're actually running this package or if we're just importing this package from somewhere else and we don't want to necessarily run all the code immediately.
Just to clarify, we don't actually have to have the dunder name, main, and then the main method. You just have a script or a script. Just have your code raw in there. You don't have to.
Oh, yeah. So the question is, you don't actually have to have the dunder name to run a Python script.
It's good practice.
Yeah, so that's a great point and probably something I brushed right over. So I appreciate you pointing that out. I could just as easily have, yeah, let me go. So the question, I think, yeah, so the question was, do I need to have, here I have a mouse, I'll use it. Do I need to have this if conditional here to be able to run code? And the answer is no, you don't. It is I would say a best practice, especially as your project starts to grow, but it's not required. I could just as easily delete this line of code and just have run be unindented, like one set of spaces or one tab, and it would just run. Now the problem that I'm going to run into is if I start importing my app package, say I have like foo package and I'm doing import app, then that code's just going to run when as I'm importing it, which is not necessarily what I want, depending on what I'm doing. Yeah, so thank you, I appreciate that. My least favorite car, also my first car, Chrysler PT Cruiser. It's actually probably not my least favorite car, but it's the first one I owned and I didn't really like it. So here, I've just been going through the slides. I do want to, we've got about 20 minutes or so of me talking left. I'll try not to go too much over that. But I do want to actually start writing a little bit of code because so far these examples have been pretty basic. Don't really show too much about actually what Python can do. This is just rehashing kind of what my goals were. So for the first bullet point, I want to be able to search cars for sale. So here I want to be able to run my Python script from the command line and pass in this case, I'm just passing in a query on the command line to, or excuse me, a URL on the command line to the web page for Spokane's used trucks and cars. And I'm searching, as you can see at the end, for Monteros. And in this case, as of a day or two ago, there was 3 for sale. And so we'll actually, what we'll do is just write this from scratch. And I definitely won't get through all of my code sample or through all those bullet points in the time that I have, but I will do a little bit of live coding and get through 1 or 2 of those examples just to show you A, what it actually maybe looks like to write Python like for real from scratch, and B, so you're not staring at slides the whole time because that's no fun. One thing I'll do really quick is I'll just make a new folder. And I'll just call this Craigslist. I'll open that folder up in VS Code. So our goal is to be able to pass in a URL via the command line and get the list of vehicles for sale. So, did you say something here?
Yeah, we had a question just a few minutes ago. Is the code linked somewhere?
Is the code linked somewhere? That is a great question. And in fact, it is linked somewhere, and I will share it with everyone. So it's available on GitHub's IntelliText samples, and then the Spokane Python User Group. So the source code for our SpokanePython.com website, as well as the example code and all the presentations I've ever done since I started this, are all available in this repo. It is linked to on SpokanePython.com. If you go there and click in the top right, that will take you to the repository, and I will also drop that in the Teams chat. So thank you for asking. So there you can go look at the finished product of kind of what our goal is as far as the code sample goes. What would you guys rather? Would you rather see a little bit of live coding, or if you want, I can just kind of pull up the finished thing and we can show. That might be a little too much code at once, so we'll do a little bit of live coding. I will try not to go too fast, but I will kind of move along at a good, solid pace as we are running a little bit low on time for me to talk. First thing we'll do, create a folder called app. We'll add, in this case, we're going to do a module instead of just a package instead of just a module. So we'll create our init file to basically tell Python that I want this to be a package, this folder to be a package. And actually, to keep it even maximum simple, I'll do what you pointed out, and we don't even need the if dunder name equals whatever. First thing we'll do is import sys as we saw before, and what this is going to give us is our there's a property argv, it's our command line arguments. So the first thing we'll do, just make sure that that is true. And what I said is actually going to happen. Oh, I didn't pass in a command line argument. Grab and copy and paste my URL. So we'll just kind of run it as we go a little bit to watch it slowly come to life. We're putting it out to the command line. Perfect. For the sake of time, we're going to write very poor code. It's no unit tests, which will probably potentially be a meetup all in and of itself, is writing tests in Python, because that's great practice. We're not going to handle any errors for the most part. We're just going to assume that you passed in a command line argument, and if you didn't, it's going to break. But just know that this is not the image of beautiful Pythonic code. That's okay. So we're using here a built-in package. So far, we haven't actually used any external packages, but that's what we're going to do here, because I want to make a HTTP request to Craigslist.org, and there is a built-in package to do that. I think it's URL lib3, but there's a much more widely used one just called simply requests. And so what we'll use here is pip, which stands for, I don't actually know what it stands for, but it's to install Python packages, similar to npm install if you're coming from like a Node/JavaScript background, or NuGet if you're coming from like a C# background. I think Maven is Java's version. I don't know. I haven't used Java in a while. But we can just pass here the name of the package and we will install it. Could type the right word. Looks like we actually already have it installed, so that's good. We'll import it. One thing could not be found from source. That's okay, we'll figure it out. One thing to note here is when you're importing Python packages, usually you want to follow a certain order where your built-in packages such as sys, like if you're using the OS, if you're using like datetime, all the things that are built in Python, generally those are all in a list at the top, and then you're going to have a white space followed by your installed packages such as requests or like NumPy, followed by another empty line, and then if I had like a local package, foo, import bar, whatever, I won't spend too much time, like I said, on the code syntax. We're gonna do request.get here. We'll get a response. We can print out the response. Response.text. and it's complaining that I don't have this package installed. I guess I don't, but I just did install it. Give it one more shot. I don't know. So I'm going to do one thing which I won't necessarily talk about too much, but I'm going to create a virtual environment, basically similar to a kind of a package.lock type thing in NPM, but not quite the same. I'm not going to talk about it too much because I don't want to. I'll save it for next time. So I'm basically going to activate my virtual environment and run the same request. Pip install requests. So now I'm just using a version of Python that I put in this directory. Basically, so if I have like different Python projects on my computer that each have different requirements, they're not going to conflict. So I can keep all of this project's requirements in one spot, and then all of my other projects' requirements in another spot. List index out of range. I didn't pass a URL. Boom. Look at that. Some beautiful. Go ahead.
Oh, I just said nice.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's very beautiful HTML puked out right to our terminal. So next thing we'll do, because again our goal is to see just the title. I don't want to see all of the HTML because that is a little bit of overload of information and doesn't really tell me much. Is we're going to install one more package called Beautiful Soup, and specifically Beautiful Soup 4. I don't remember where the name came from, but basically it's a HTML parser, as well as some other markup languages. We're just going to install that. We've installed it to our local folder of packages. Preferred install. Oh, pip. I did not know that. I would never have guessed that. Thank you. So we've imported this other library, and we're going to tell this package we just installed, Beautiful Soup, to create the soup. End talk. No, I'm just kidding. So the soup is basically just an object that we can more easily work with instead of just having this giant string of HTML that's really cumbersome to navigate, and we start writing gross regular expressions to try and parse it. We're going to use this package to enable us to basically search through this HTML document using Python code, but using things that you would use in like a JavaScript world, like a dot class, like a CSS name, or a element ID, like the pound sign. But what we'll do is, and actually, first things first, we're probably going to want to go figure out what properties we're looking for. So if I open up Craigslist, oh, look at that. That is beautiful. Actually, this one, if anyone's shopping, these are hard to come by. The SR means it has a bunch of winner capabilities that are not very common. The more you know. I don't actually know what SR stands for, but it sports. Oh, the more you know. This one's got a bull bar. Neat. And Pasco, if you want to make the 2-hour drive down there. Anyways, not the point of the talk, but always fun to talk about Monteros. If I could select the right document. So first thing we're going to notice is we have an unordered list of HTML elements. Looks like each element has a result row CSS class. So let's see if we can just grab soup.find. Thought it was find one. Find all. We'll just do find all. And then this is where I'd Google the syntax, because yeah, I think I think you have to pass list item and then pass the property like you're looking for. We'll find out. For result in, so here we have a for loop, very basic for loop. Dot, dot, dot is basically the same as pass, which is basically a no op, or I just want to run this thing and I need to put something inside my for loop, but at this point in time, I don't actually really want to do anything. I just want to see that it's going to actually iterate through my find all function. Could just as easily write a very simple print statement. Here, Beautiful Soup is complaining that I'm not actually telling it what I'm trying to parse. So I'm going to tell it that I'm parsing HTML. I think that's what it wants. So we'll run that one more time. Print our result, because that's probably more useful than not printing anything. Okay, you might have been right, sir. Maybe not. I won't cheat. I'm tempted to. I'm tempted to go look at the code I already wrote, but we'll figure this out. Yeah, so here, one nice thing of using VS Code or like a full-fledged IDE like Pycharm is I can control click. So if I hold control and hover over it, I'm going to get some syntax, or excuse me, not syntax, but documentation that's going to help me figure out how to use this function, as well as clicking F12 or control clicking will take me to the source code for this package. Though in this case, it's just taking me to the typing or the interface, which I won't talk about, but it's a little bit different. Look for name, a filter on tag name. All right, I lied. I'm doing it. I'm cheating. Look at all that. Find. Selector. Where did I? And all. List item. Class. Oh. So close. But so far. In this case, it's passing class underscore because class in and of itself is a reserved word. So they just throw an underscore on the end. So that's what I was doing wrong. So if we run this one more time, we're going to now start seeing some stuff getting printed out. I see result info, result price. This is looking like what we're looking for. Let's take a look at the website one more time, see if we can figure out where the title is coming from. And then for the sake of time, I will buzz through my last couple slides and we'll try and do a little bit of working together. Or I can keep going if you guys would prefer that, because I haven't gotten as far as I hoped to, but we'll figure that out. So if I expand my list item, we'll see I have some result info, which looks like it has the title in there somewhere. Looks like we have result heading. Looks like we have a result title class, which has the name in it. So we'll actually change this from result row to result title. And it looks like it's or actually what we'll do is this is our result element. So this I should be able to do, I should be able to search inside of this element as well. Title equals, and then if this exists, it should have a text property. Out. So let's give this a try. None object is not callable. So this does not exist. Interesting. So here I'll introduce a new feature, which is called debugging. If you've come from another programming language, you're very familiar with debugging. In Python, there's multiple ways to debug. VS Code has, and as well as the idle and Pycharm and every other major IDE is going to have usually some way to set breakpoints using the GUI, where you can set dots over here. And if I run it using VS Code, it's going to pause my code execution at that line, and I can inspect my variables, see what's going on, try and figure out why I'm running into issues. Python also has the built-in, function called Breakpoint. And basically, if I'm running this from the command line, this is going to pause my code similar to how it would if I set a breakpoint using my IDE. And it will drop me into what's called Pdb Python Debugger something. Again, not sure what it stands for, but it's basically where you can debug your Python code via the command line. So what we'll do here real quick is run the line of code that's giving us an issue. Looks like say again.
PDB, like program debug.
Oh, yeah.
PDB symbols for programs like C# or C++.
Yeah. Try this one more time. I probably might need a dot.
In between.
It should be able to kind of recurse through. And like, oh, there might be. Let's once again see how I did it before. Oh, I'm surprised that this worked, because I thought this would need a dot, because it's like a class name. Interesting. Set a breakpoint. Spell. Result title. Oh wait, apologies. So that is not working, because now we're not finding anything. Is my sound coming through? It is. Oh. It is on now.
Can you repeat that, whoever just asked the question? Maybe? Okay,
I'm not.
well, they might come back in a bit.
Select one. Oh. There we go. Maybe not. We're getting there. Apologies. I swear it took way less time for me to do this before. So we're basically, all we're trying to do is get the result. So one thing to point out, so in VS Code right now, it doesn't know what result is. And this is where I'll touch on briefly. Python is a typed language in a way where I can define that result should be a certain type. You'll notice here I'm not actually defining the type of anything, but if I change URL, I can tell it that URL, the variable is always going to be a string, and if I try and set it to URL equals 1, it's going to complain to me, my linter. And if we look at result.select1, you'll see it's white. Basically, that's just VS Code indicating that it doesn't know what result is, and so it's not offering any syntax like awareness or highlighting or code completion to help me figure out the properties that are on this object. So one thing I can do here is probably the typed result. And I wouldn't recommend typically doing it this way. And I will make it a beautiful soup tag. And now if I do typed result, I start seeing some actual syntax kind of highlighting some awareness of what this object type is. One sec here. I promised you command line titles, and you will get command line titles soon. Or command line prices. I'm obviously parsing something wrong here, and I think I'm doing it differently than I did before. We'll look really quick. It's like before I found all the list items that were a result row, which is what we are doing here. And then I found, so that was just a helper function I created. Interesting. So let's actually go ahead and remove this. And I think I can just pass the dot. Boom. Magic. Thank you for coming. See you all next time. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, apologies that took a little longer than anticipated. I think what was going on here is I was using two different ways of calling this function. One, you can pass in just the type of the element. So for example, I could pass in like, hey, I'm looking for a div, and then I could pass it, this is the class name I'm looking for, like whatever. But you can also just pass in one parameter, which is dot the class that I'm looking for. And I was just running into a little bit of struggles. Live coding, it's fun. But what we can see here now is our fancy, nifty command line application that's going to allow us to search for all the vehicles we want from the command line. Does anyone have a vehicle they would like me to search for? And we will see what is available.
Dart.
Dart. Dodge Dart?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, 1972 Dodge Dart. Let's go. 2016. Don't get the automatics. Their transmissions break. Yeah. So, I mean, in and of itself, this is more of a toy. This isn't like super like helpful at this point, but we can very easily see the titles of what's available. And this did take me a few minutes longer than it probably would have if I was just coding by myself. Coding in front of people, the pressure's on, you know. But you can also see some areas where we would improve this program. Yeah, add the price. A link to the car, that would be tight, so I don't have to go research it. That would be super helpful. The full code example is available on the GitHub repo that I shared. Go take a look at it if you want. All the things that I promised we would do here tonight are done already. We're at 7:06, and I really do want to have some time for us to work together, so I'll probably leave the live coding there for now. But for example, some places where we can improve, hey, I want to add a command line parameter to find the lowest one. And here we see, hey, this 2002 Montero Sport is available in Spokane for $650. I would be a little sus if I saw a vehicle for $650, probably something wrong with it, but that's okay. I mean, my first car was $500 and it was fine. Some other things we could do, we could automatically go and scrape all of the images from Craigslist and save them into a folder. So we have these beautiful photos of some random rusty Montero in Deer Park. Be careful. Websites don't always love you hammering their website and downloading everything, web scraping. Oftentimes there's a robot.txt, which I think Craigslist has. Take a look at it. Robots.txt. So this is basically just, hey, we don't want you to go scrape this. I won't get into this, but if you are doing some heavy web scraping, this is something you'd probably look into. Maybe you want to search multiple regions at once because you're like, hey, man, like I'm willing to drive many hours to go find the perfect Montero or Dart. So I'm going to search in Spokane and Seattle. And so in this case, you see before we just had 3. Now we're passing in Spokane and Seattle. We've got a regular expression going on to kind of replace the URL of the Craigslist location we're looking for with the name we're passing in. Now we can see way more Monteros. This is where I would really like, I think it'd be awesome to get some collaboration going on. And so these were some ideas that I was thinking, hey, if maybe we want to pair up, work on this for 15, 20 minutes, maybe see if you can implement like something new, like to this super fancy command line tool. Are you guys up for that? How are you feeling? Yeah, I know you don't all have computers, so it seems about half people do have computers. People with computers want to pair up, meet someone new. This is a meetup group, so meet some new people. My plan is we'll spend the next 15 to 20 minutes and work on adding a new feature. The source code's there and available. You can download the fully functional code and then just add on from there if you want, or you can start from scratch. I can also push up the code I just wrote, though. You saw it was not very much. Aaron.
So can we too? We had a comment, Craigslist may randomly ban your IP if detects too many automated requests.
Yeah, so you may, what I heard was websites will ban your IP if you make too many requests. Super true. Good thing we're all in the same room, so probably all have the same external IP address. So hopefully we can get Craigslist to ban the IntelliTech IP address. That's my goal for tonight. Let's make it happen. So yeah, here, pair program. People online, there's a lot of different approaches. There's VS Code has a live share extension built in, and I can also, I think, split the meeting automatically up into, I don't know what the word is. Breakout groups. Teams features change very frequently, so I can't remember if that's a thing. People, the second. Breakout rooms. 2. No, I want to create. How many people are in the chat? Right, we'll make 4. If there's 3 of you, then I expect 3 times as much code. No, I'm just kidding. We'll create the rooms, come back in about 15 minutes, and whoever's willing, share what they made. And it can be super broken. It can not work. You can just talk about the idea, whatever you guys want to do, and create rooms. I don't know exactly how this works. I haven't done it before. All right. Cool. All right. Break.
Okay, so we did the same stuff that Joseph did, and then we decided to find a CSV file. So actual download is a CSV file, because we didn't want to parse HTML, which sounds really painful. So we downloaded the CSV file, and then we print out the CSV file, and then we started to parse it, but we didn't get that far. But I can show you what we did so far. So there's the CSV file that we parsed down, and then we started to read it, and we started doing a dictionary reader, which was this line right here, to read the content. We added a header to the CSV file because there wasn't one already. We got tired of actually naming the column, so we decided to go with A, B, C, D, E. We did add an extra line here with the header, and then added the response text. We printed the content just to make sure we still had it. That's our unit test, because we know we wouldn't get an A if we didn't have a unit test. Then we did a reader, and then we started to do this part, but we weren't sure how to read the data out. So what we had here was row ID, comma, row. I should have quotes there, sorry. And then description. But that it's not finding the ID. Hello. It's not finding the ID, so that's where we got stuck. So I'll go save that. So something about what we're reading out of here didn't like, and that's as far as we got. So, participation. We should get credit for participation. That's about it. That's my goal. We searched for a CSV file, and we found one, and you could choose how many rows. So we chose a row 10 rows, and it was literally just that URL right there: sample video CSV sample spreadsheet 10 rows -CSV. Seemed like a sample CSV file. If you look for sample files, that's what we did.
Good. Now I'm not. Cool. I appreciate you guys being willing to talk about a little bit what you did, work through some live coding of your own, get things set up. Thank you.
Thank you. It's fun, Brent.
That's about all I have for today. I'll close here. Learning resources. If this didn't answer every question you have about Python, like I hoped it would, these are some of the resources I've personally found particularly helpful. I'd like to highlight, as I did in bold, the official SpokanePython.com, but also the docs are really great. RealPython.com, super great, though they will start trying to get you to pay to use it, and I just opened it up in a private browser because I don't want to pay right now. Full Stack Python's nice for doing like web dev stuff. There's a couple books that I've heard are highly recommended. I haven't bought any of them personally. And then watching videos from conferences like PyCon, PyCascades is the Pacific Northwest conference. Watching videos is always a fun way to learn. Next, so I think December 7th, the first Tuesday of the month, we're going to try and stick with the first Tuesday of the month for now, especially with the holidays being on the third Tuesday, kind of later end of November and December. Plan for next month is Journey to the Pythonic Peak. Basically, the idea there is I introduced some very, very garbage code today, but the goal was to just show you what Python has built in and just kind of get your hands into Python a little bit. The goal next month is to start looking at, hey, how do I actually write Python code that someone's going to want to read and use and maintain? Starting to use things like generators. I got a whole bunch of stuff kind of planned. I won't get into it now, but I would say if you are wanting to continue learning Python, my goal is that next month we can build on what you learned here today. Hopefully you got Python set up either by the end of this meetup or something you can go do between now and December. And next time, have Python ready, maybe have a couple scripts written of your own, and then we can start figuring out how to write nice scripts. That's it. Thank you for coming. Appreciate you guys' time. Mark. What's your homework? That's a great question. I would say homework for next month is install Python, make sure it's working. If you're using a Mac or using Linux, make sure you've got Python. Say what?
If you're using a Mac or Linux, good luck.
That's good luck. Yeah. Make sure Python 3 is working and you're not using Python 2. And then I would say if you really want to come prepared, get an A+ for homework, pull down the repo, the code, run it, maybe make a little change, comment code out like some of our folks over here did, and just make sure you can run it and maybe mess around with it a little bit. That should be enough to get you good to go. Maybe write some stuff on your own if you're really wanting to shoot for the stars. I'll stop. Cool. Thank you, guys. Thanks, Bryce.